Hello, Villafranca. Unfortunately, I will be speaking in English, so I will try to speak slowly if you haven't got the simultaneous translation. I have a few points to make, I think, on this topic. My perspective comes from a kind of a more holistic one, in the sense that I've got a scientific background, but I'm also a wine journalist, and I communicate about wine. And in the wine world, really the whole green agenda has been seized by biodynamics and organics. And I think that they've taken, basically, if you did a word association, and you said to a normal consumer of wine, please tell me which word you associate with green when it comes to wine, they would say organics or biodynamics. And I think that's a problem that for those who are interested in the scientific sustainable solutions. Because really, in the eyes of most of the people in the wine trade, sustainability is seen as a sort of cop-out. It's seen as a lesser option that's for people who haven't got the courage to go fully to organics or biodynamics. So in the wine world, for instance, in New Zealand, who've got a very effective sustainable wine growing program, which 95% of producers have signed up to. And if you want to exhibit your wines at one of the New Zealand wine growers' tastings, so the trade tasting and the various, in London we have the New Zealand wine trade tasting, the only people who are allowed to exhibit are those who've signed up to Sustainable Wine Growing New Zealand. And there are data that have shown that I think the reduction in agrochemical inputs over the last decade have been something like 80%. I don't know the exact figure. I've got a paper. If anyone wants to see that paper, then please email me. I'm very easily findable on the web. But even in New Zealand, where there's just been very effective sustainable program, the image there amongst the wine growers is that kind of sustainability is merely a stepping stone on the way to organics. And that if you really care about the environment, you'll go and you'll join the organic movement, which I think is a problem for scientifically rational sustainability. Because although I think biodynamics and organics have had a really positive impact on the way people see the vineyard, I think that some of the aspects of them aren't based on science. They're not scientific. For instance, the insistence that obviously you need to spray your vineyards. Organics and biodynamics say you have to use sulfur and copper, and there's no real logic to saying that sulfur and copper are legitimate while systemic fungicides are illegitimate. And I think this is a problem for the wine sector. For instance, with carbon footprint, if you're going to use inefficient contact fungicides, you have to drive your tractor up and down your vineyard a lot more often than you would if you were using more efficient fungicides. So your carbon footprint is inevitably much higher. And also there's a sort of anti-science sentiment towards biodynamics. It's almost like it's not only are some of the aspects of it difficult to justify from a scientific viewpoint, also there's a sort of inherent anti-scientific sentiment within the whole movement. But I did say that I think biodynamics has been positive because it's very high profile in the world of wine. Lots of very high profile growers are using it. And it's changed the way that we see the vineyard. In the past, people used to see the vineyard merely in terms of the crop plant, the grapevine, and the soil was seen just as an inert substrate for growing the crop plant into. And that simplistic viewpoint led to people seeing pests as a problem that you then use the silver bullet of chemical sprays to deal with. And so this is the bad old-fashioned view of conventional agriculture, which was seeing the crop plant, the soil as a medium, and then the arsenal of chemical sprays as a way to eradicate things that were going to get in the way of your crop plant growing. Nowadays, actually, I think science has changed. You've got the rise of the integrated pest management movement, the very elegant, scientific, sustainable solutions to problems with crop plants. And we see the vineyard now more as an agro-ecosystem. We're considering the vineyard not just in terms of the crop plant, but also the soil microlife and the insects and the the other plants that grow in and around the vineyard. And the use of biological control, the use of ecological compensation zones, which create areas where beneficial insects, the predators of the things that are bad, can find a place to live. Those sorts of concepts now are kind of coming into viticulture much more and coming into agriculture much more. So there's a possibility that the scientific sustainable viewpoint can seize back some of this green agenda from biodynamics and organics, whilst not ignoring the positive aspects that organics and biodynamics have had in changing the way that we see vineyards. Really, I think one of the big problems as well with organics is that there's this failure, as we've heard today, to integrate the ideas of carbon footprints, of, you know, as part of the actual. Organics ignores it, and this is crazy. This is balmy. There has to be some integration of the concept of the carbon dioxide emissions and the whole LCA of, you know, looking at the whole process, has been explained very well by some of the speakers today, into the sort of the idea of organics. And while I'm saying that, I think there are a few other issues that I think really we should look at, one of which is the level of uptake of these. It's all very well having some of the great estates applying biodynamics or organics, but really, if you're going to have much of a change on the whole of the impact of viticulture, you can't do it 10 hectares at a time. You have to get the big companies involved. You have to get the large growers involved as well. There has to be a almost universal uptake in the wine industry. And in a wine industry where we're faced with issues of oversupply and ever-increasing downward pressures on cost, it's very difficult to get people to implement solutions unless there's some upside for them in it, other than just a feeling, oh, well, this is something we're doing that's right for the planet. You have to get everyone on board, and I think that's really important. And on that note, we come into the issue of consumer recognition. I guess with agricultural products generally, organics does have some consumer recognition. The term organic is known by most consumers. And if you go into a supermarket in the UK, I'm sure the situation is similar in Spain, there'll be a section that's devoted to organic produce. Interestingly, we don't see that in the wine aisles. We don't see a section in the wine aisles that's devoted to organic wines. And I think this is because most people tend to assume, they think already, that wine is produced in a very organic, sustainable way. If people look at wine, their vision is of vineyards and lovely wineries, a traditional product made in a traditional way that has a low environmental impact. And so it's almost like that there's no extra, you don't get more for your wine just because because you can say that it's organic. It doesn't sell for a higher price. So there's no real upside on that point of view. And when it comes to sustainability, there simply is no consumer recognition of sustainability at all. I don't see in any, if there were, retailers would use it to leverage the products they sell. When I go into a supermarket, I don't see any sections of produce being devoted to sustainable products. And when it comes to producers, I don't see producers using the term sustainable to try and sell their products either. It's something that's really a discussion, a conversation at the moment that's happening within the industry. And what's interesting is what would be very interesting would be to see whether there was any way of creating a consumer concept of sustainability that would then allow consumers to see the benefit of buying products that are produced in a sustainable way. So that they can let their conscience effectively direct them towards this sort of sector. And to that point, I think it would be really very positive if organics could take that extra step and encompass the whole carbon dioxide emissions and carbon footprint elements into its definition, because organics has a legal definition at the moment. It has consumer recognition. People know what organics is. If organics could also incorporate the carbon dioxide emissions into that framework and become more holistic as a definition. And if it could also becomes slightly more scientifically rational in terms of its use of crop protection products, rather than this arbitrary distinction between copper and sulfur and systemic fungicides, then I think that would be very positive, because then that would solve the problem. Because you wouldn't need to have this conversation with consumers about sustainability. You could just say this is organics. And then organics truly could be something that producers could aspire to move towards, and in this progression from sustainability to organic. Because ultimately, unless the consumers have a conception of what organics or sustainability is, then the wine industry isn't going to be able to leverage that to pay the extra costs that are incurred in terms of working in a more environmental way. So I think I've probably said enough. I've got a few other points. Yeah, can it pay? Yeah, and I think to get buy-in from all the different sectors, I think would be really important, to get retailers to buy in, to get producers to buy in, and to get consumers to buy in. And that joining that sort of loop, I think, would then really add momentum to this whole discussion. Because as I said, it's no good if it's just a discussion happening with just a small proportion of the sector. It needs to be the whole sector that joins in for it to have that positive environmental benefit.